Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. Welcome to another CHERN online briefing. My name is Jelena Gledić. I'm CHERN's Science Communication Coordinator and a China researcher based at the University of Belgrade, and I will be moderating today's event. Now, CHERN, the China and Europe Research Network, is a platform for knowledge exchange about China's increasing presence in Europe among academic and non-academic communities. It was supported by COST, the European Cooperation in Science and Technology, as a cost action in November 2019. And CHERN is chaired by Nana de Graaf, with Jeffrey Henderson as its vice chair. It currently has 5 working groups working on different topics with their respective coordinators, and it has more than 300 working group members. And to learn more about CHERN and our activities, please visit our website and subscribe to keep up to date with our activities. And today's CHERN online briefing is one of these activities. Among other aims, we mostly strive to facilitate exchange among researchers, journalists, and policymakers. And recognizing the specific needs of these groups, the idea for the CHERN online briefing was born. This new initiative was spearheaded by CHERN's core group members Ágota Révész, one of today's speakers actually, Alexandra Filius, and myself. And through it, we seek to identify significant events in the context of China's European presence and provide primarily journalists and policymakers with relevant insights from researchers from our network. We keep the briefings short and practical, and we leave it open to you whether you want to pursue a certain topic further on a one-on-one basis. So today we'll have a brief introduction into the topic. We will then have 4 short inputs from our speakers, around 5 minutes each, and then we'll have around 10 to 20 minutes for a general Q&A. And do remember that the idea is not to exhaust the topic today, especially with today's topic, which is very complex. We rather want to provide some insights and make connections and then further develop them after this event. And the meeting is now in the format of a webinar. It is being recorded. And after the short presentations, we will invite everyone who wishes to join us for the Q&A as a panelist, and that part of this event will not be recorded. Now on to the topic. This is actually the 3rd CHERN online briefing in what became a cycle on the risks and opportunities in academic and research collaboration. The call for this topic garnered so much interest that we had 2 previous events in which our moderators and 6 insightful speakers spoke about the complex topic of academic and research collaboration in a changing geopolitical landscape and how the process of de-risking collaboration with China actually plays out in the domain of science and academia in different areas and domains. Today, I will not go into detail into what has already been said. I will rather refer you to the recordings. The recordings of the presentation parts of the events are available on our YouTube channel. But there were fruitful discussions after both of the events, and I will just share a few points that stood out to me on the complexities that have emerged in our previous discussions. In the last event, we also discussed a recent manual on due diligence that came out. And there is definitely no doubt that science and scientific cooperation are key assets for the sustainable development of society and the world as a whole. And as such, they do need to be safeguarded. However, it becomes quite complicated when you try to define what we are guarding from and what we can accept to lose in the process. This recent manual highlights these complexities and offers some possible solutions on how to conduct the delicate assessment process. And we will hear today about the Operate assessment tool, which has been developed by the same agency to assess opportunities and risks in cooperation with international partners. And what has come out as a sort of consensus from the last events and in preparing today's event is that there seems to be an awareness of the importance of this issue in the academic community, as well as the urgency of the need to tackle it. And there is already a wealth of research. There have been practices shared. There have been propositions made on how to navigate the changing landscape. And that's also reflected in the great interest for the CHERN online briefings on this topic. However, what remains still to be done is for relevant policymakers and funders of scientific research to also recognize the complexity and the urgency of providing accurate assessments of the risks and opportunities of international scientific cooperation. And it seems that resources are what is needed to do that as well as it should be done. Because accurate assessment has to be a balancing act. And just one example is the common approach of using a researcher's or an institution's country of origin as a filter. And that can lead to safeguarding, but it can also lead to blanket exclusion. We're discussing today cooperation with China, and it's important to note that many recent documents do not mention China explicitly, but they have emerged in the context of the EU's changing relationship with China. And even while CHERN was funded as a cost action, we were affected by changes in which researchers from certain Hungarian institutions can be reimbursed for their participation in our events. And as someone coming from Serbia, I can personally testify how much damage explicit or implicit exclusion from international scientific cooperation based on country of origin can make, since here at the University of Belgrade and at other institutions, we can still see the effects of the 1990s sanctions in Yugoslavia and certain attitudes and practices that exist among academics that linger on even decades later. So accurate assessment will require care and individual attention, and thus it necessitates additional resources for all stages of the research process, from initiating cooperation to implementing projects through to evaluating the results. And we do hope these briefings can contribute to raising awareness on the importance and urgency of this issue so that the EU, Europe, and then the world as a whole can find the right balance in pursuing research excellence, scientific innovation, and true academic freedom. And with this introduction, I will now give the floor to our speakers. Our first speaker today is Qiao Cong-rui. Dr. Qiao Cong-rui is the founder and director of Law for Sustainability, and she brings over a decade of experience in integrating legal, policy, and governance sustainability frameworks globally. She also contributes to policy advisory projects, including acting as a core researcher on sustainable academic partnerships between the EU and China for the China Knowledge Network. In 2024, her book, Chinese Rules and Procedures for Addressing Mass Actions, a juridification account, was published by Springer Nature, and it offered critical insights into Chinese state, society, and government-citizen dynamics. Cong-rui, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jelena, for this engaging introduction. A big thank you also goes to Ágota for this opportunity. So 5 minutes for my input. In 2013, I had this excellent opportunity that would change the course of my career and perhaps my life. I took part in the Utrecht International Human Rights Summer School that offered Chinese students full scholarships that year. I still remember my days in Utrecht vividly, not only its very interesting content, but also the ways that local lecturers interacted with students, not hierarchical at all. This encounter immediately ignited my passion for human rights research in the Netherlands, actually in such a powerful way that in 2014, I decided to leave China for Utrecht to pursue a doctorate degree. Over the next few years, I was lucky enough to be part of several excellent Dutch-Chinese human rights initiatives. Those years, looking back, were truly a golden period of collaboration, perhaps a honeymoon, if you like, between Europe and China. However, if you can move to next slide, as we are more than aware that the period came to an end during the COVID pandemic. Both the political and the logistical challenges have made it very difficult for researchers in Europe and in China to maintain the same level of collaboration in human rights and other sensitive areas. If you can click on this slide, Jelena. Last December, I met a group of 30 plus senior researchers in the field of science and technology from China and Europe. While both groups shared their urgent concerns, the contents were very different, as we are familiar with from local narratives. On the European side, the top concerns were Chinese espionage law, the political influence upon academic collaboration, and the weak IP protection. On the other hand, the Chinese colleagues shared their concerns how to pursue local and international research and development fundings to innovate technologies and their applications to tackle the aging society, the social inequality, and to strengthen Chinese technological and market competitiveness globally. Then I came to realize that with this parallel world, one issue, two diverging narratives, it will be very difficult for us to converge or reach the same level of collaboration before the pandemic. And on that meeting day, if you can click again, basically the European colleagues conclude with be cautious, please. Chinese colleagues conclude with more collaboration, please. And then this year, I had the pleasure of joining, we can move to the next slide, the project led by Professor Marijk van der Vende at Utrecht University. I'm going to share with you some of the preliminary findings because it's still ongoing based on the data collected from these projects. How to know your counterparts better. Click on this slide, please. I have identified 16 dimensions where you could identify where the European and the Chinese sides, their perspectives, their goals, and their demands emerge and where they do not. We don't have time to go through each of them. I will basically present some of what I see as the most interesting findings. Although both sides agree that it has become more important between Europe and China to pursue academic collaboration, and there has been a range of challenges to this course, the Chinese experts, surprisingly, 41% of expert survey that we conducted attribute the change to the European side. If we can move to the next table, which will present a bit clearer. The experts from Chinese universities, most of them being faculty members, believe during the pandemic period, the EU and their universities have changed their stance to EU-China collaboration. And then, if we move to the next slide, what kind of reactions from the EU and the China side are pursued and perceived and understood? There are several factors attributing to this challenging period, and surprisingly, 44% of Chinese experts respondents are kind of disappointed at the rise of scientific nationalism in EU. And if we could move to next slide. And that is much higher than the common concerns we see in Europe. The Chinese researchers are kind of surprised by this scientific division on the EU side. Next slide, please. And then what kind of demands Chinese researchers expect? The top requirement or demand is some change to the perspective and narrative among the European policymakers to tackle this suspicion and mistrust climate. Of course, this is ongoing, and next time I'd like to get some research funding to delve into the day-to-day practice at Chinese universities and also European universities when they have a collaboration proposal, how the review and the registration procedure really takes place. And with that empirical data, I hope I can help both sides to tackle this mistrust culture a bit more. And that concludes my input. Thank you, Jelena.
Thank you so much, Cong-rui. That's a really fascinating perspective, and I do hope that you will manage to continue this important research. And you've highlighted a couple of paradoxes that some of us, when we were discussing preparing this, also mentioned this paradox of different perceptions of academic freedom, and even Chinese researchers who have always been sort of presented as someone who doesn't have a lot of academic freedom now saying that they notice this in Europe. So much more dialogue is needed there for sure. Thank you very much. And we will now go to the next presentation by Guangyu Qiao-Franco. Guangyu Qiao-Franco is an assistant professor of international relations at Radboud University and a senior researcher of a European Research Council-funded project, AutoNorms, that investigates international regulations surrounding military AI. She's currently working on articles on dual-use technologies-related export controls and China's policymaking on AI and arms control. Guangyu actively promotes Track 2 dialogues between China and Europe in the area of emerging technologies and is a member of the European delegations to the Sino-Europe Cyber Dialogue and the Europe-China Expert Working Group on AI and International Security. Guangyu, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Jelena, and thanks for having me. Today, I mainly want to share some of my own observations of the risks and opportunities for EU-China research collaboration based on my recent fieldwork experience in China. So if you can go on to the next slide. Before I get started, I want to show you some of the highlights of my recent visits to Beijing and Shanghai. Between 2021 and 2024, I had the privilege of joining and also contributing to the organization of several China-EU dialogues on AI with the help of a few professors from Tsinghua University, Shanghai Institute for International Studies, and also other organizations. I visited a few AI research institutes and data centers to learn about Chinese practices concerning AI security governance. So this valuable experience has definitely given me an edge in my research. Next slide, please. My experiences suggest that it is vital to maintain this EU-China research collaboration. So I'm probably not the only one in the room to think that it is challenging to get China right. So for many reasons. So first of all, for one, that like the information you gain online or from secondary sources is not always reliable. So the easiest way to verify information is by talking to an insider. An example might be helpful here. So for those following AI politics closely, and you might see a lot of news circulating about China not signing on this like very important AI regulation document that was recently developed in Seoul, South Korea. I was also invited to comment on this decision on several occasions. By talking to a few Chinese experts, what I learned is that the story can be as simple as China not being included in the policy development process and therefore not signing the document, which contradicts the reasons I gave in my analysis and those I saw online. So this just shows the importance of having this access to primary data. So secondly, that Chinese secondary sources are disappearing or not available. So in our recent research on China's Belt and Road Initiative, for example, some articles on the website of CNKI, China National Knowledge Infrastructure, and also on the People's Daily website are not available, which could have affected our research findings. So this on the one hand shows some possible intentional information control on the part of Chinese government or other institutions managing those sites, but also on the other hand shows the importance of maintaining information exchange and research collaboration. Additionally, international networks also open you up to other opportunities. I outlined a few here, including research stays, research visits, assistance with data collection, translation of your work into Chinese, joint publications, joint grant applications. As someone based in Europe, you can join as an external collaborator to apply for China's National Social Science Grant, for example. And also you can co-organize international dialogues and workshops. So the last one is especially important in the current political environment, given that the official exchange is getting more challenging and probably less frequent. It's important to keep this unofficial channel of communication open. Next slide, please. So for those who plan to do field work in China or enter some sort of research collaboration with Chinese partners, you might expect some challenges in the coming years. Just echoing the point made by Cong-rui before, that Chinese actors are acutely aware of this China threat narrative circulating in Europe. So when Europe is reconsidering this continuation of research collaboration with China, China is also pulling back. So from my experience, it's actually getting more challenging to interview government and private sector people who are subject to a long internal approval process to talk to those affiliated with non-Chinese institutions. And also participants are reluctant to share information. So my collaborator based at a Chinese institution and I can get totally different responses from the same interviewee. So nowadays, I mainly rely on my collaborator to conduct interviews in order to gain quality data. So finally, I want to emphasize that the Chinese culture values relationship building, and then so it takes genuine interest, curiosity, respect, patience, and also long-term frequent interactions with the help of personal connections to help with establishing trust and understanding. So recent moves to several ties, while necessary in some fields, can only work to the detriment of relationship building and trust building. So I think the decision to cut ties should also take into account of these negative ramifications in the social aspect. So I will stop there. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Guangyu, for showing how the socio-cultural aspects can really reshape collaboration, both in methodological terms and in practical terms in a field one maybe wouldn't expect. And also thank you for highlighting the importance of seeing different perspectives on things that we would think are common sense, such as perspectives on information sharing, for example, the role of media and other things that are certainly something to be discussed. We'll now go on to our next speaker, Ágota Révész. Ágota Révész works at the Helmholtz Center Potsdam of the GFZ German Research Center for Geosciences, and there she's project manager for ASK, which is the acronym we see on the slide. So that stands for Awareness, Security, and Knowledge in International Collaboration. Ágota is a sinologist with years of experience in academia and diplomacy. She now conducts research on EU-China narratives while also working on research security between Germany and China, as well as raising China competence among non-sinologists. And last but certainly not least, she's the leader of CHERN's working group on public diplomacy and knowledge production, and she is one of the initiators of the CHERN online briefings. Ágota, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jelena. It's really fantastic to be here and to be able to share and also to be able to listen to others who work in the same area. So may I have the first slide? So we do have this project at the Helmholtz Center, Potsdam, German Research Center for Geosciences. On the photo, you can see one of our research platforms for geothermal energy in Radboud, Germany. So that's one of the areas that this institute where I'm at is engaged in. ASK stands for awareness, awareness of risks, and of course also a sense of responsibility, security, which means basically a dynamic and sustainable security architecture, and for me it basically means organization development, and knowledge, which to a large extent means development of China competence, which is very, very badly needed. And ASK is also very close to my heart because it also stands for communication and also for self-reflection. So before you start asking others, maybe you should start with asking yourself. That's my very deep conviction. So we are one of the 7 projects that are funded by the Initiative and Networking Fund of the Helmholtz Association, which is comprised of 18 research centers altogether. So we are one of those 18. Next slide, please. Now, very briefly, the context for cooperation with China, and of course, our cooperation, I mean, in the natural sciences. So the German policy for research cooperation is now de-risking, so a policy of de-risking, not decoupling. De-risking basically means that we do cooperate, but procedures must be adapted. In the China strategy in China of the government of the Federal Republic of Germany that came out last year. There are a few priority areas. You can see some of those on the slide, but there are also green technologies and sustainability, of course. So those are the areas for definitely for cooperation. But there are also areas where there is when that receives strong criticism and I mean, you can also see them there. So these are the ones where, I mean, we definitely need to address these questions. So dual use, censorship, forced technology transfer, and reciprocity. definitely need to be addressed. The photo that you can see here is that of a measuring station on a glacier in Kyrgyzstan. And this station measures hydrometeorological data. And this also shows that our research institute is really global. I mean, we cannot but act and work and do research globally. Next slide, please. And as last, I want to share with you a few results that we had from a workshop series of workshops last year. That was a workshop series with the title Research Collaboration with China, a hands-on approach. And for each occasion, we invited three kinds of people: China experts, researchers, and also people from the administration. So what I'm now presenting to you is a kind of collective wisdom. What we ended up with were basically three need-to-knows. You definitely need to know your partner, your research field, which means you need to understand what your research might be applied to or applied for, and you need to know the state of your research, a state of research in your field in China, to be able to assess, for instance, reciprocity, what exactly you need from that and what they might need from you. And we also ended up with three takeaways. China is a fact. China will stay with us. So you need to get prepared for a world with China. And the second thing is that, I mean, it's futile to start thinking in do's and don'ts. Research or knowledge security is a very complex issue, and there are and will be several shades of risk. This is the topic that my colleague Niels will elaborate on further. And the final one is collaboration is definitely not for collaboration's sake. So it starts with understanding your own interests and continues with knowledge and awareness. So it's a very complex thing. And of course, addressing complexity is always difficult, but at least, I mean, yeah, it starts with understanding actually the complexity, understanding where you are. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ágota, for a great presentation that builds on what we've heard today already. And it actually exemplifies what I mentioned when I said resources. So an Ágota at every place would be great to be able to moderate these things and to provide these kinds of insights and to manage that. But of course, that's not always a possibility. And then hopefully there are maybe some tools that can help and that can help people maybe who don't have the experience that a sinologist such as yourself would have, but who can help maybe assess things in a precise manner. And that leads us to our final presentation today by Niels Kaffenberger. Niels Kaffenberger is a scientific and legal officer at the German Aerospace Center Project Management Agency based in Berlin. He is a lawyer and has also an MA in sinology. Previously, Niels worked as a lawyer at the German Aerospace Center, focusing on contract negotiations, primarily in aerospace research projects, and as an internal specialist for EU funding matters. Before joining the German Aerospace Center, he worked at a prominent Chinese financial institution and clerked at the German embassy in Beijing. Niels, the floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you, Jelena. It is a pleasure for me to give you an introduction to the Operate application. So mainly due to geopolitical tensions, cooperations on the STI sector should be considered more carefully, and research integrity is becoming more important. However, many researchers are still not fully aware of it. Some of them do not see the risks, while others, which is also an important fact, fail to recognize the opportunities in international research cooperation. Due to a lack of specialist knowledge, we see a risk of uninformed decisions and premature restrictions in cooperation. We at the DLR German Project Management Agency developed a tool that can assist in this consideration and to raise awareness among the researchers. We call this tool Operate. So next slide, please. Operate is a tool to include scientists and researchers in the assessment of opportunities and risks when cooperating with international partners. It's a concrete assistance in the context of a sometimes unclear debate. It triggers discussions and raises awareness. And finally, the process could lead to better informed decisions. Operate is a two-step assessment. The self-assessment is a first step where a panel of experts individually answer a catalog of questions about the likelihood and impact of specific risks and opportunities in international STI cooperation. The group assessment is a second step where the results of single questions are discussed and possibly reassessed. The assessment process results in an opportunity and risk matrix, which lays the basis for developing a risk mitigation approach. The target group of Operate are main risk carriers, namely those who decide on the project at universities and research organizations. Furthermore, it sensitizes scientists and administrative staff. Next slide, please. So during the self-assessment, the panelists are requested to answer 10 questions on potential risks and 10 on potential opportunities. We developed these topics based on 2 years of testing and input from scientific landscape. Here you can see 3 topics for risks and 3 for opportunities in the cooperation or intended cooperation, like a potential dual-use application or the access to additional knowledge. Next slide, please. For each question, panelists evaluate how likely it is that each risk and opportunity will occur, as well as how serious the potential consequences or benefits might be. We use a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 means very unlikely and 5 means probable. Similarly, for the impact, 1 means insignificant and 5 means critical or highly beneficial. Next slide, please. So based on the answers, Operate creates an opportunities and risk matrix that highlights the main value of the responses to each question. With a matrix, you can see at a glance whether the panelists rate a cooperation as rather high risk or low risk and high opportunity or low opportunity. Based on the results, you can make better informed decisions and, before starting a cooperation, develop countermeasures in case the risk occurs. Next slide, please. So in this final slide, you can see the whole assessment process. So first of all, the operator sets up the assessment in the application and defines the topic and the panel. We suggest a diverse panel of about 5 to 10 experts. The questionnaire will automatically be sent to the panelists, so the participants of the assessment. And after this step, the self-assessment starts. Then the operator selects the questions for the group assessment. The group assessment can be done virtually or physically. At this meeting, only the pre-selected questions are discussed. The panelists can adjust their responses individually. They will get an extra access link to do that. The discussion process is the greatest added value with Operate. It makes the need obvious, raises awareness, and includes different perspectives and leads, in the best case, to a joint decision-making. So if you want to become an operator, do not hesitate to contact us. It is free of charge. However, if you do not have the resources to implement it, we can also do this for you. You can commission us to carry out the whole assessment. Yes, then many thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Niels. This was a brilliant presentation and exactly, I think, the kind of tool that is the great direction, which gives some kind of security for researchers. It has both the quantitative and the qualitative aspect, and most importantly, it opens dialogue and it gives a structured way for people to talk about all these issues, and hopefully there will be resources to actually implement that. And that was our final presentation. So I'd like to thank you all for very, very informative and insightful pitches. They do build on the 2 previous events as well. In case any of our viewers wants to do an individual follow-up with any of our speakers today, you can use the QR code on the screen or go to our website, and you will have links to our speakers' professional web pages in their bios on the event page. And this concludes the part of the session that will be recorded. We will now proceed with the Q&A session. And this is the moment where we will say goodbye to people who will be watching this video on our YouTube channel.